In 1672, a frenzied crowd gathered outside a Dutch prison. They battered the doors, seized two men, and forcibly dragged them down the stone steps. The attackers, wielding the knives and delivering the fatal blows, were affluent merchants, local officials, and members of respectable families. The victims they tore into pieces that day were brothers, Cornelius and John DeWitt. The brutal murder defies obvious logic. For the previous 2 decades, John DeWitt had served as Grand Pensionary, the highest official in the Dutch Republic. He had engineered a golden age of wealth, military power, and global influence for the very people now tearing him limb from limb. To understand how a prosperous society turns on its own leadership, we have to look at a fracture line running deep through Dutch culture, a bitter, decades-long power struggle between the Free State Republicans and the Orange faction, who demanded rule by a monarch. The assassination of the DeWitt brothers forces us to look past the gore and into the specific pressures that transform a wealthy, stable republic into the mob we saw on those steps. 22 years earlier, the DeWitt family's political rise began in the harbor town of Dordrecht. In 1650, the sitting Prince of Orange, William II, attempted a military coup against the state. The move failed, but he threw several prominent Republican deputies into prison, including Jacob DeWitt, the father of Cornelius and John. Before the crisis could escalate, the young prince suddenly died. Left without a head, the Orange Royalist faction collapsed. The surviving Republican leaders stepped in and executed a bloodless constitutional revolution. Freshly sworn in as advocates after years of studying law abroad, John and Cornelius DeWitt walked directly into this newly created power vacuum. The brothers moved as a unit, yet operated with entirely different temperaments. Cornelius was proud, rigid, and bold, acting as the unyielding enforcer. John was the tactful, pliant statesman, possessing a rare genius for negotiation. By 1653, John's political maneuvering secured him the title of Grand Pensionary of Holland. He was now at the absolute center of Dutch statecraft. But their authority rested on a razor's edge. The DeWitt's survival depended entirely on strict governance to ensure the volatile, sidelined Orange Royalists never regained enough influence to strike back. The tiny Dutch Republic was boxed in by hostile monarchies. DeWitt deflected these threats like a master chess player, keeping massive kingdoms divided and distracted. He even mediated peace between distant nations like Sweden and Poland to secure vital trade routes. The diplomatic board reset entirely when Charles II was restored to the English throne. The new king despised the Dutch Republic and immediately set out to destabilize DeWitt's government. Charles aimed straight for the Republic's domestic fracture line. He threw his absolute backing behind his own nephew, the young Prince of Orange, William III, hoping to trigger a royalist uprising. Faced with the rising threat of a separate French invasion, DeWitt executed a brilliant diplomatic pivot. He negotiated the Treaty of Breda, ending hostilities with England and forcing a pact of mutual assistance that neutralized Charles's immediate threat. The citizens of the Republic enjoyed 20 years of immense prosperity under this arrangement. Yet that peace was an artificial, high-tension construct. It required DeWitt to execute flawless, constant maintenance, knowing a single diplomatic failure could invite total ruin. In 1672, that single failure arrived. France launched a sudden military invasion that completely bypassed DeWitt's diplomatic tripwires and swept over the Republic. The Dutch military, neglected during years of peace, instantly collapsed. Foreign troops overran the country, sending a wave of absolute terror through the population. In the grip of panic, the citizens experienced total political amnesia. The 2 decades of wealth and stability DeWitt had engineered evaporated from their minds. They looked at the advancing French army and blamed the Republican government for leaving them defenseless. Extreme existential fear strips a society of its patience for complex governance. Faced with annihilation, the populace abandoned the slow mechanics of the Republic and began screaming for an authoritarian savior. The desperate public demanded that the young Prince of Orange be handed dictatorial powers to drive the French out. True to their nature, the DeWitt brothers refused. They held rigidly to their Republican ideals and denied the prince their support, even as initial assassination attempts left John severely wounded.
Royalist operatives weaponized this final refusal. They spread targeted propaganda, framing the brothers as traitors, providing the exact spark needed to turn a panicked citizenry into the murderous mob outside the prison gates. The men were destroyed, but their bloodline survived. Cornelius left behind a daughter, Wilhelmina, who later married John's son, physically uniting the legacies of the two brothers in a single family line. John DeWitt was the virtual ruler of the nation during its greatest era of power and glory. His end demonstrates how quickly a system built on logic and law can be overtaken by a sudden, collective outburst of popular fury.